Thank you so much for making this series. I found it so interesting. Uh, and I wanted to start off by asking you about James Brown's legacy and cultural impact. You know, they were so big, so important. Tell me about why you wanted to tell this story and how you went about crafting it.
Absolutely. I am born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. My father, like James Brown, was born in South Carolina, raised in Georgia. So my Uncle Ed, my Uncle Alan, everybody loved James Brown. My mom even went on a train from Savannah to New York to meet my Aunt Hazel to go see James Brown at the Apollo before I was born. So he is a part of the fabric of their lives in a very significant and seminal way. So I wanted to understand that. But the thing that struck me most importantly was a 1969 cover of Look magazine, of all things. Look magazine had on the cover in 1969, "Is James Brown the most important Black man in America?" What a provocative question, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's crazy. And I was like, well, was he? Is he? I want to know. Let's let James Brown tell us. Let's really listen to what the man had to say. And that was the approach. The approach was really to go through the hundreds and hundreds of archival interviews and listen to all of the tracks. Um, and see what he had to say about his own life, about his own lived experience. I wanted to listen and create a canvas where James can help me tell his story. I didn't want to make assumptions or have any type of conscious or unconscious bias about the lived experience of this human being. I wanted him to participate and help craft his story across these 4 episodes. And that's how I approached it. I wanted to start at the beginning and go all the way to the end because I didn't think it was right to pull into a particular part of his life. We needed to understand this Black man born during the Depression, this Black man who buck danced during World War II, who recorded his first record in the 50s and was on King Records for the infamous Sid Nathan, right? And recorded this incredible live album, even though no one believed in it. I wanted to understand what was driving him and look at what happens to a child abandoned by his parents who grew up in a brothel, was institutionalized in a juvenile home as a teenager, and how all of that contributed to the creative genius that we know, to the person who shifted culture, who shifted the way Blackness was perceived and the way Black masculinity was understood in this country, and literally changed music, created funk, and laid the foundation for hip hop. That's what I wanted to know.
Well, you did an excellent job of exploring it. Going
Thank
back
you.
to the archival footage, I thought it added such powerful visuals and so much authenticity to this story. Was it like putting together a puzzle to make sure everything went in the right place?
It was, Mari Keiko Gonzalez is our editor, and she's a fantastic creative counterpart for me because I had this vision in my head, and I knew so much of the footage I wanted to use and why. In episode 1, you see footage from Child's Game and the Logger. That's footage shot on 16 millimeter by Zora Neale Hurston. So obviously she's one of the first Black female filmmakers. And for me to be able to use her footage almost 100 years later to help us understand the context of James Brown's reality in the 30s was not only important to create that visually, but also important for me to connect with her in a way to tell this story. So I'm actually bringing Zora Neale Hurston into 2024 to aid me in my storytelling of James Brown. So that's why the archival was so important. And it also is untouched. This is what it was. There it is. This is first, and as someone who has spent a lot of time in archive houses and libraries, primary source material is very important to me. I like to do my own research, and everyone that worked on this project knows that I love the research. I love being in a library. I love discovering things. Having worked on, historical docs, knowing where to look and knowing how to listen. Those are skills that I think are really important and that were important in this instance. So you can hear the interview fully, but you also hear when the interview stops, but James is still talking, or
Right.
you hear in the studio when he's talking to the band and the engineer is still recording and he may or may not know that it's being recorded. These are these moments where you hear his story and you learn about his journey and you get that the personal anecdotes that help you fill in the blanks, right? And
Mhm.
connect the dots.
Absolutely. It was such an experience to hear James Brown's music and see him perform. And you realize the lasting influence he has on so many artists today. Do you have a favorite moment or story from anyone you interviewed?
Well, I mean, it was such an honor to sit down with Mick Jagger, LL Cool J, Jimmy Jam, Chuck D. But I have to tell you, when Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis talked about Janet Jackson's That's the Way Love Goes, because that's one of my all-time favorite songs, and they said that was based on James Brown, Papa Don't Take No Mess, I
Yeah.
was done. I was like, what? And, I love the video, I love the song. I've seen Janet Jackson in concert perform it. I had no idea that was the groove from
Right.
a James Brown track. No idea.
Same.
So so that I would say that was one of my most revealing moments. I would also say spending time with Dr. Deanna Brown Thomas and Dr. Yama Brown and
Mhm.
Larry Brown were important because those were his children. Those were the people who saw him off stage. I love the fact that Deanna had a pony and his name was Sugar, and that and I never knew that they integrated that subdivision in Augusta, Georgia, and that they were the first Black family to move in there. And it's 1971, and you're thinking, wow, the first Black family in this neighborhood. That's just like 50 years ago. It's
Yeah.
not that long ago that
Right.
she and her sister lived in this neighborhood, and you think of all the things that James Brown had to encounter, all of the first, and what type of trauma, what type of pain, what type of resilience, what type of fight and survival skills that you need to make these things happen, and how all of that contributes to, we love to hear him scream and we love to hear him howl and groan and moan. And when you unpack that, you know that that's the lived experience that we're listening to. And we know that that's part of his connection to the ancestors that we're hearing. And we know that that's that Blackness, all of it, the full range of Blackness that we're experiencing in that moment. And it's powerful to listen to and powerful to watch.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would consider myself more of a casual James Brown fan. So I was aware of the domestic abuse, but not the drug use and abuse or even his return to jail. In a definitive piece on an artist, and I absolutely think this is that, I do appreciate seeing every facet of their lives. Why do you think that's important?
I think we can't look at a fraction of a man or a woman. I think we have to look at the whole lived experience. We also have to look at the internal and external factors that impact that lived experience: the family, the politics, the society, the institutions, the systems, everything that impact a person. None of us are one moment in time.
Right.
We are a collection of a whole lot of dots that are connected, and I think looking at someone as a human, because he was a human,
Absolutely.
um, is important. And I think we have to approach that in a way that's not biased, consciously or unconsciously. We have to just lay it out. And that's why I wanted to start with all the research and listen to him and let him tell me. It's a documentary, right? You start with the question and then the story starts to reveal itself. James Brown started to tell part of his story through what I was listening to. And I think that becomes really important when we examine someone, that looking at him from the day he was born dead to the day he actually died on Christmas Day in
Right.
2006 gives us the fuller picture of a lived experience, of a life, of a very well like lived life, highs, lows, ups and downs. He lived a life.
It's true. Very theatrical, and I don't mean that in a bad way because he had the showmanship, he had the stage presence. Just like hearing him talk about himself in these episodes was so great, and I think so illuminating on him as a person.
I think James Brown is a cultural icon, so I thought it was important for him to speak to us. I've never met him, so I didn't want to speak for him. I thought it was better to allow him to help me tell the story, you know? And he
Absolutely.
has a lot to say.
He certainly does.
And I think your question about understanding where and how to tell a full story is really important because understanding humanity and warts and all is really important for all of us because it helps us to have more empathy for one another.